See some familiar faces here. Cool. Well, we'll go ahead and kick it off. I think there's a lot of ways we can kind of intro here, Sean. I think I could probably give you a pretty decent at best intro. So I'll go ahead and kick it to you to offer kind of an introduction about why we're here. Frankly, I think it's probably pretty interesting to people to share the story of how we met and just, yeah, tell us more about your background, kind of with the topic that we're speaking about today, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, let's start with how we met. So we happened to work briefly in the same office space, not even the same building, but like literally the same space. One of the sort of crazy stories in the building of XBE is we had an office that was in not a terribly bad part of Chicago, but not the best either. And it was literally shot up overnight. And so I got a call at 5:30 in the morning and said that there was sort of glass and 7 bullets in the wall and just sort of the whole thing blown apart. And so with like a day's notice, I was out of town actually. So I came back and said, I have to move this place like right now. And one thing led to another. And I ended up finding that the office you were in had, I don't know how many square feet, like a small studio apartment. Yeah, well, the whole office, but our little
in the back, yeah,
cubby in the back.
Yeah,
so I rented for a few months this like part of the office, not even a separate room, just like a square in the back.
For sure.
And we never really. I mean, I was sort of in the middle of a bunch then, and didn't get a proper introduction, or didn't do a good job of properly introducing myself to much of anyone. And there's sort of a bit of an odd culture anyhow. And but anyhow, I was walking from one side of this office space to the other, and you stopped me, I think, to ask if you'd seen me running on North Ave or some other pickup line, and there we go. We've been friends since.
So, yeah, I think one of the office where I was working at the time was a media company that a lot of you might know, Built Worlds, and so what was interesting is like, we had explored the concept of doing through Built Worlds, like doing a more of a co-working environment with a lot of startups based, who are trying to build companies in the construction space. And I think by no intents and purposes, like, did we find you for that purpose? But it was super interesting to learn that, like, oh, this like random startup who's working in the back of our office is building a construction tech company. And frankly, I didn't know that for a while, which I thought was kind of hilarious, but
very funny. Yeah. If you zoomed out enough, you'd think, wow, how nice. What an ideal story.
Right.
But I think the details were like way more serendipitous and random than any of that. But yeah, anyway, so that's how we met.
For sure.
And yeah, I'm founder and CEO of a company called XBE, like the letters XBE. And we make science and technology solutions for the horizontal construction industry. So I think horizontal are things that don't go up in the sky. So roads and bridges and trenches and excavation and other heavy construction. And our main business is software. We provide an operating system that some of the bigger vertically integrated horizontal construction companies use to kind of run their operation. And we also provide chemistry solutions for the modification of asphalt and manufacture of asphalt. So that's a bit about us. And yeah, I started it back. I mean, you can always pick different dates, but I started working on the business in 2016, in January 2016, sort of became a full-on business in about a year later. So I'm about 4 years in, and it's kind of like the story of how we met. If you zoom out a little bit, it like was pretty much a straight line to where I am now, but the details weren't so elegant.
For sure. Well, I think one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the call, like, kind of the topic for today is, kind of building, bootstrapping a business, not seeking venture financing if you don't need it. And I think one of the unique parts about your story and how you built XBE is like you've built it. I mean, you've relatively bootstrapped the whole thing. And I think the startup culture, particularly in the Bay Area, particularly like I know a lot of the startups that we work with inside of our incubator, a lot of startups that are just trying to learn about the financing landscape and how to go about building a real legitimate tech company. It's just, everything you read is like, go raise money, go find venture. And I think what I appreciated about our early conversations was that I think you look at financing and building a business a bit differently than other people. And what's really interesting about that approach, obviously, is like, oh, if you don't take venture financing is the most expensive way to go finance your business. You are giving up your most valuable asset as a business owner, your equity, right? And as a VC, that is not, for some people, it is not the right approach. Like I think we are pretty transparent about the fact that venture funding isn't for everyone. And frankly, like, you should be very selective when you part with equity. And I think to start off, like, wanting to hear a little bit of your thoughts on one, how you plan to grow and how you strategically plan to grow without significant funding. How you've thought about some growth decisioning as you move to different stages of your business and hit certain landmarks and all that. I think, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, cool. Well, first off, I mean, I think that there's some possibility that I'll look back on this conversation in like 3 years and go, and as like a cautionary tale for why I should have raised more money, right? And so like, I don't even know that I'm advocating for necessarily for the approach that that we've taken, though I would advocate for considering it as an option. I think that that's where I come down, that the more options you consider about how you grow a business and what it means to run your business, then the better off you are. Because like it turns out that paths like the one that we've taken seem, while they seem a bit impossible, aren't necessarily impossible. I mean, like, sort of proof in the pudding. And the more options you have, the better the outcome will be on average. But so I mean, that's sort of like a setup for my take. I think that at some level, the most valuable thing to me is small c control, if I'm being totally honest about it. So I am like less concerned about the sort of give up equity from a financial standpoint. I feel like that's, if it's just growing the pie, I mean, I think that the VC point of view on this is pretty easy to see, which is, do you want to own a larger piece of a small pie or a smaller piece of the big pie? And, depending on how the leverage game works, it could be much better to have a smaller piece of a big pie. And so my motivation really is not too much on that. It's more that, especially in the business that we're in, that's somewhat niche, I don't trust others' judgment about the business, and I do trust mine. And so I'm not generally all that interested. I mean, I'm very interested in others' points of view, but I haven't been that interested from the start at having too many influences that would make it difficult to make what I thought was, a contrary but correct call. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's probably the biggest reason why, I was reticent to take venture financing, because it does kind of put you in it does kind of create your destiny in terms of business model approach. And, I considered it. I've talked to many venture capital firms over the last few years. And I mean, it was interesting at first, I think that they would have not taken my call except maybe by introduction or reputation. And now I get a bunch of inbound calls about the business because it's done pretty well. But the thing that always left me a little cold from those conversations is that, they had very strong takes with very little information about what the right decisions were for the business. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I was like, do I really want this? Or would I rather sort of, if I could find a way to leverage the other things that I had, what customer relationships, my own capabilities, mm-hmm. the little money that I had, capability to work with a team in India, etc. Like, I sort of like looked around and said, like, what do I have that I can leverage already? And let's like see how far I can get with that. And then that'll put me in a better position, not a worse one, to have a conversation with external financing sources when that moment comes.
So I think the most interesting part of that answer for me is your judgment. I think your own confidence in your judgment, because you've spent so much time in the logistics space and the construction and horizontal construction space. I feel like that's a little bit. I feel like it's a little bit rare. Like I don't see founders with as much conviction around their decisioning early on. I think it's just like, I'm new to this. I don't like, I know the market, but like, this is a new thing. How would you characterize or I guess advise someone to go out and feel confident in that judgment? Because I agree. I think it's extremely important. And probably, I mean, think of a generalist VC who doesn't understand the built environment, comes in, tries to run your board, tries to determine your business model, tries to help you out with your pricing strategy, and they don't know the nuances of this space. You likely will fail.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, that's an important thing. How do you trust your judgment?
Well, I still think that this is sort of a work in progress for me. I have long trusted my judgment. I haven't always acted on it. And, for some number of years now, I've got a good friend. I won't mention who he is, but like he and I have talked about our need to do the things that we believe. And that, if I was to sort of inventory all of the mistakes that I have made professionally, the vast majority would be errors of omission, not of commission, like that I didn't do the thing, not that I did the wrong thing. Now, there are some exceptions, but I mean, I think for the most part, that's where I'd come down. And part of it is that I for the first half of my career, was basically paid to help people in very significant positions of authority make the right decision. I think that in the first place, I had those roles, whether it was, so I
What, in like a consulting capacity?
Well, in multiple. So, I mean, I started from a sort of management and strategy consulting capacity. Well, I didn't start here, but at some point I got to the place where I was advising the Fortune 500 on how to rebuild how they purchase things. So how to build their supply management capabilities. And I think over 7 years, I worked with 35 Fortune 500 on that problem and was good at it. And and advised on many, many, many billions of dollars of spend and all over the world in all sorts of areas. And then ended up becoming chief procurement officer of Conway when I was pretty young, responsible for $4 billion of spend. And then from there, we reorged Conway Freight, the biggest single network LTL carrier in the world, and then was, head of pricing, head of strategy, most of IT. Like, I mean, so it was in one of the top jobs in different parts of the organization. And so early on, I had those jobs because, I was technically skilled and lucky, I think, as much as anything. And then, but over a period of time, I actually gained a lot of experience too.
Yeah.
Right. Because at first I was just
so you earned your judgment.
Yeah. At first I didn't. I was just a bit of a, sort of wonder kid, I think. For all the bad that entails too, I think, for every way that one would interpret that. Yeah. But eventually, you kind of, maybe if you're lucky, grow into it. Now I'm, in my 40s and have, I don't know, 18 years under my belt in those sorts of moments. And I don't think that I had earned the opportunity really to have that much influence and authority when I was younger. But I mean, it did serve the purpose of getting me a lot of repetition, right? A lot of repetition in making decisions and thinking through hard problems. And so yeah, I mean, I guess the one sentence answer is that, I believe I have the aptitude and my knowledge is pretty good and I've got decent experience. What I need is to put it to work.
Yeah. So a little bit of kind of, I guess a little bit of brass tacks for how to look at how you look at different funding options. So there's the option early on, like you're at the seed stage, you're maybe considering doing some debt financing, convertible notes, safe notes, you're just getting off the ground. I think the conversation of funding is a little bit, it certainly can be a little bit tough because it's case by case, right? Like the founder's personal financial situation is always kind of is always a thing. Like if you can bootstrap the company because you have a great personal financial situation, I think most people start there. But if you don't, the question is, where do you turn with a great idea? And, do you take out a bank loan? Do you go, apply for a bunch of credit cards and go that route? Do you actually look for angel investors and look for, do a family and friends round? Personally, I've had a lot of conversations since I've joined Shadow, and it's been about a year now. A lot of conversations of just like how to get started with this and how to think through, I think this is another important thing, like how to think through where you go from that initial round of financing and how this plays out over time. Because each consequential step in the funding roadmap, they kind of build off of each other, right? And I think kind of the long-term compounding effect from a financial perspective is one thing to consider, but two, just like, when we evaluate a company, we look at their cap table and try to understand who their previous investors are. What is their role in the company? Are they on a board? How much control do they have? Like that severely impacts our decision making. So yeah, I guess like frame out how you think about that. I'm curious, like how do you think about if you don't have a huge cushion from a personal perspective to get going? How do you approach decisioning from a funding perspective?
Yeah. So, part of my, I think, take here is going to be a bit trite, but so it goes. I think that if you can start while you have some other source of income also, that's a really good idea. So in my case, I had sold a business, and that business had a couple-year contract sort of attached to it where I had to help with the transition and, typical kind of stuff. And so that was a 2-year contract. And for the first year of it, my perspective on how to handle the 2 years was I was going to sprint like heck for the first year, because I had some obligations that I kind of knew what they would be over the 2 years. So I went really hard at the first year, and got ahead.
Yeah.
I also was a little, I think, crafty in that the obligation was not mine personally, but it was a business that I started. And the reason I did it, because I had this idea, that I would do what I'm going to say from the beginning, is that I wanted to get out ahead and knew that would require me for a while. But that if I got far enough ahead, I could fulfill the rest of the obligations with someone I hired. Right? If I made the obligation on this sale my company's obligation and not mine personally. And so that bought me basically, again, and I worked really hard the first year, time and a half, say, for the entire year. And, but what that bought me is that I had, some money coming in for a while and some time. And those are the two things I needed, where I could start working on what was next before it was totally crystal clear what it would be. Mm-hmm. And I kind of needed that, right? I needed some time to both time to delay decision-making and also time to explore and time to do some of the bricklaying on the fundamentals. And so the trite part is like, if people say, hey, if you can, kind of in the off hours, do some of the initial bricklaying, that's good. And I actually totally agree. People hate that answer, and I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it feels like, people want to like get to it, and that they feel like every minute they're not spending on it is a minute that they could be spending on it. And yeah, that's true, but nothing's free. Mm-hmm. Nothing's free. And I've got a very sort of simple rule about what to work on from a program. So I program too. And like from a programming standpoint, I only work on things once I'm sure what to build. And so like, there are a lot of things that I'm sure I'll build eventually, but I just, until I know what to do next, I kind of like keep it on the back burner. And I think building a company is kind of like that too. It's not totally crystal clear what to do
Yeah.
at first.
Yeah.
And so you kind of got to let it stew. You can't like instant pot, the strategy of the company. You got to let it simmer a little, or maybe you can, but it's expensive as hell.
Well, I think like if you're quitting your job and you're jumping into bootstrapping a business and you have a short runway, you're kind of forced into an instant pot situation. And I mean, from my own personal experience, it forces bad decisioning because of the pressure and the stress.
That's right. I mean, you think about, um, yeah, I think about sales strategy sometimes this way. And I really thought about this a lot in prior jobs and companies, which is that, if you have the information advantage, you always want to press the pace, right? Because like people make mistakes. And when they have an information disadvantage and time is tight.
Yeah.
And so it's like pretty easy to rotate that sort of truism around, that like strategic truism around, be like, well, what if I don't have the information advantage, which obviously you don't when you're starting something. Like by definition, you are at a big disadvantage because it's like much is unclear, very little is clear. Then that means you don't want to quicken the pace. You want to slow it down early, right? And wait. I mean, again, trite thing coming here too, but until you have product market fit, even in theory. I mean, because I would sort of see, sort of product market fit in two different phases. There's like phase one, which is like, do I believe in the theory of my product market fit? Honestly, I really think I have it figured out. And then two is like, has the market agreed with me? But I think, once you have product market fit empirically, like you've seen the market validate it, then, okay, you probably want to press the gas if you're really, really sure. But if you only have it sort of, or until you have it in theory, and you're sort of like, wading through the decision space, I think you're better off to go slow. Again, because you're at an information disadvantage. And so you have to avoid making mistakes in that period of time, by giving yourself time. It's just the exact opposite of what you do if you have the advantage.
Right. Yeah. I think the product market fit aspect, I think is, there is an element to taking that slow. Like, I don't think speed gets you product market fit. I think speed helps in getting product to market. But actually finding and understanding when you have fit in the market comes from a lot of like slow conversations and a lot of slow decisioning around feature sets and priorities from a tech build perspective based on feedback you've actually heard from the market. And there's just no way to get that other than through time, right?
I think that my perspective on product market fit may be worth mentioning, which is like, I don't like in the kind of business that I'm in, which is, kind of a niche, right? Like a niche vertical where we provide like a very valuable software platform to a relatively small universe of players that like heavily depend on it to run their business.
Yeah.
And in that world, I am much less interested in having validation from 10 customers than I am early on, at least. When I was at the very beginning, I was much more interested in having one company and then two, and then three, and so on, that really depended on us. And the judgment part, getting back to where we started, is I trusted my ability and our ability to solve their problems in ways that would give us an asset to leverage. Because like you can solve people's problems individually in a way that gives you zero leverage. In fact, in a way that forecloses on options. But if you're a good architect and you have a good abstract understanding of the theory of the business, and you say, well, I'm going to solve their problems, but I'm going to make sure that every decision I make to solve them is leverageable, that creates an asset for me, not just income. Then, and I'd say a lot of faith in that ability, that, that we would make those decisions correctly. Then I care about 10x customers, not 10 customers. And a 10x customer for me is someone that, you know, is worth in terms of sort of how much they depend on you, you know, 10 times what any sort of average customer is that pays their bills on time, but doesn't, you know, adopt what you do.
Sure.
Right. So, you know, I don't know, that's our, you know, in terms of product market fit, I think that was our approach, is that we took a little bit of like let's go slow and steady and make sure that we're fundamentally solving hard problems in a way that's leverageable. And it really worked. I mean, that part I think has been sort of the secret to this.
Can you do that though? Can you take that 10x customer approach with all different types of businesses? Like, for instance, if your business requires an aggregation of, if you're a marketplace, right, and you need, you know, hundreds, thousands of users on both sides of the marketplace to have an effective business and an effective model, like, you know, can you take that approach?
Well, I mean, no, I think is probably my short answer. I think that the longer answer is that if your business is like a two-sided marketplace, and you don't have a fundamental advantage in creating both sides of the marketplace, I would be pretty suspicious of business. I don't know, that's a very hard lift to pull off. And so I would have to think about it a bit more, but I would bet that the same basic theory would apply, and that, like, you know, you're going to create the critical mass in the market, usually by leveraging something you have, you know, so the relationships you have with existing customers or whatever. And I would tend to think that if you looked at the channels for the critical mass in the first place and treated them the same way, and so instead of trying to like leverage the 10 channels, I'm going to take like one and perfect how we actually pull off this, and then solve that in a way that creates an asset we can leverage across the other channels, that like basically the same comments would apply. But I think your point's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just interesting because like we typically don't, our thesis is kind of, we don't fund marketplaces.
Sure.
And
same reason, I assume.
Yes, I mean, same reason. I mean, the cost of if you don't have a unique advantage, the cost of customer acquisition is so high, it just becomes who has the most capital kind of wins scenario. And in a lot of cases, you don't even win. I mean, you see it with a lot of the marketplace businesses today. I mean, Uber, I think, is a decent example. Just a lot of just very, very high costs and low margins in terms of actual revenue being brought in. So I think like that's just an interesting thing when you're decisioning early on.
Well, I mean, I think that the take there is like, I mean, I think we both said it, which is that if your plan is I'm going to build a two-sided marketplace, and you can't like, and the other side of the conversation when you say that isn't incredibly jealous of the unfair advantage you have in doing so, don't do it.
I mean, I think it's a great point. Like, it needs to be like, in order for you to build a successful marketplace, like it needs to be like a crazy advantage.
Yeah, like hilariously obvious if you say it out loud. Like, oh, okay, well, good. Since you're starting on third base, cool.
Right.
But no, if it's not that, you're not going to do it. You know, because it's like you know, drawing an inside straight, and like if your happy path is you raise, you know, $100 million and you know are out all of it before it starts to return. I'm like, really? Are we sure? And you know, point me to the success stories again that didn't have like a glaringly obvious hilarious advantage. So Sean and I talked, I think 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, for your illustration that you did on the innovation landscape, which I kind of shared on social media this week. But I think one of my favorite parts of our conversation was Sean hired an illustrator to basically cover what I was going to talk about at his annual customer conference, which was just canceled due to COVID. Very sad. But very, very neat idea to illustrate kind of what the high points were of the conversation and the keynote, if you will. And I think, so my favorite part of that conversation was when we started talking about labor, and specifically labor in construction.
And I've had a few conversations recently with different founders who want to solve that problem, the labor problem in construction. How do I match an employer with skilled tradespeople? Because like there's a massive shortage. We all, we talk about it every day. I want to talk about the two different problems within labor in a second. But first, everyone is trying to solve that problem, the labor problem, with a marketplace. And they are trying to onboard hundreds of construction firms, thousands of construction firms, and then they're trying to onboard tens of thousands of tradespeople. And none of them really have a unique advantage. I actually, formerly worked for a company that tried to do this in the construction space, and it is so difficult. And I'm curious to hear, because you're kind of on the front lines. I'm curious to hear your perspective on like if that is a marketplace a potential way to solve that labor issue.
I mean, I'm skeptical. I'm not skeptical of there being a solution, and I'm not skeptical of the problem. So just I'm so optimistic on or so bullish on the opportunity that like I'd say I have at least one eye on it myself. Mm-hmm. Though I that droops a bit, but at least it's one of the two. But anyways, so that's how much I am interested in the problem and think that there's something there. I am pretty skeptical of the kind of approach you said for a few reasons. One we already covered, but one of them is a lot more simple, which is that construction, not all construction, but certainly the kind of construction that I am involved in most construction is hyper local, right? It's like, it's not even regional. It's like city, or, metroplex. And so, like, what leverage do you have if you have like a nationwide two-sided marketplace when the sort of nexus of networking is like 25 miles or 50 miles, maybe, and I don't even know it's that big. Like, not a lot, not obviously. I mean, you could like, of course, people would come up with answers, right? Which is like, well, we're gonna have a technology stack that's leveraged. Okay, fine. Or we're gonna have a brand. Fine. I don't know. I'm not terribly convinced. I think that and we talked about this a bit the other day, and I feel like this is like a little bit of it sounds like a hot take, but I kind of believe it, is that I think that the key problem to solve is how to bridge communities because I actually don't think that there is fundamentally a labor shortage in construction. I think that there is a problem in that the construction companies, the organizations, aren't necessarily connected well in the labor pools that are interested in the jobs. So for example, most construction, just to be completely reductive about the point, most construction firms that are of decent size are owned by guys like me, right? Like 40 to 65-year-old white guys. Yet the vast majority of the labor force that is excited to have the jobs that we're concerned about, and as we talked about, there are two sort of different classes of jobs. There's the crafts trade, and then there's a fewer number of technical sort of higher end jobs. But let's focus on where the most labor is needed. That the populations that are excited about that work are on average what people would consider sort of disadvantaged populations. So that's in particular, Latino and Black, English as a second language, immigrants. I'm saying legal, but these are populations that for whom the kind of income that you can make, being a screed operator or lead man or driving a dump truck is pretty good, because those are relatively well-paying jobs. Even not sort of qualifying that comment too much, they pay pretty well. Now, are they very difficult? Are they a bit seasonal? Are they physically hard? Are they a bit dangerous? Yeah, there are some buts. But the good is good. And so the problem to solve, if like, let's stipulate that's all true, because I think you could argue some details there, but let's stipulate that's true. Then the problem to solve is how do you connect a company and its leadership that's from one community with, which is, let's say, not, sort of your typical, multi-generational family owned sort of, wealthy family owned construction business with, the population of first generation English as a second language, Latinx population. That to me, if you can solve that problem in any locality in the city of Tuscaloosa, you got it. And so that to me sounds a little bit more rifle shotty. That doesn't seem like a shotgun across the country approach. That feels like identifying, what are those sort of underserved populations of prospective labor in a given locale, and how do we reach out to them and make real connections? Not some bullshit Instagram, but I mean real connections.
A lot of what's talked about in terms of the labor problem is like no one's excited to go work in construction. And
that's projection. I just don't buy it.
Yeah,
I don't buy it.
And I think that's to your point, there is a group of people who are excited and actually really respect the trade. They respect the profession and they want to go pursue it, right? And
it reminds me of like when my oldest kid Kayla was going to college, and she was, as all kids were or are, was like like very fixated on getting into a couple schools, and it sounds like unhelpful advice, but I was like, you know what, like you want to go to a place that wants to sort of have you. And, if you're sort of net contributing in a positive way, so like you got to find a fit that's mutual. And like my take on the whole topic of how do we convince people to be excited about construction is don't try. Like literally say the good, admit the bad. And there is a population of people that are excited to make that trade because the money's pretty good.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's got a lot of dignity. It has a lot of good to it. And so like, if you're talking to people, like, I'll use what sounds like a sort of straw man argument, but I'm in the business, so I hear this every day, is people are like, well, how do we get into the high schools and convince kids that it's okay to do this instead of going to, some private school? I'm like, don't. Any kid that's been convinced that that's the path they're taking, they're not the person to talk to. Talk to someone about, that is excited to sort of find a way to work in the community that leverages the sort of like personal integrity, personal sort of character that they have, and intuition that sees maybe that they over 10 years could lever themselves up into management, but that, sees making, let's say, $80,000 in a relatively short amount of time by getting like 2 steps up on a crew and then seeing where it goes from there, that hears that and goes, you know what, I don't love being outside in the hot sun and dealing with asphalt, but the trade is pretty good. I'm going for it. Talk to people that have a kid already that need to make ends meet. Like don't talk to people that believe they could be president someday. Talk to people that like are sort of have some notion of what the challenges are going to be in their life personally. Yeah. Either because they're disadvantaged in some sort of way or they're not. They just like, have life and they've got a wife and they got kids or a husband and kids and a parent to take care of. And they're like, you know what, I got to make some choices here. And I think that's a good one. Like, to me, it's like, it's so obvious that that's the thing to do that it's, I mean, you can hear it in what I'm saying. It's frustrating when I hear people instead sort of like pine for the validation from a population that'll never believe this is good for them. And so like the businesses that solve this will fundamentally get that. I mean, in their core will understand, I mean, of course, I think I'm right on this, but like we'll understand that sort of point and we'll solve it directly, not kind of like spread Vaseline on the whole problem and hope it ends up making the picture look better.
I just think it's, I personally think it's going to be rare to find that sort of person in construction who is that open-minded and sees it that clearly. I personally don't. I've worked in construction virtually my whole life. My father's a home builder. I've been on job sites. Like my first experience with falling in love with the profession was like working on a job site, project managing, working with tradespeople. And there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect from what's happening in a top-down way to what's actually happening on the job site. And
This is literally my favorite topic. So
Yeah.
can I rant on this for one second?
Dig in.
Okay. So I don't believe that there's a disconnect between ownership and this point. Like, so in other words, throw a dart at a board and pick the owner of any random construction business that like decent sized construction business. And let's have a conversation with that owner. And I'm going to say 80% of the time, they would immediately agree with that point. Now, let's take a different dartboard, which are the middle management. So the people that aren't on the front lines, but don't own the place for those same construction companies. Mm-hmm. Let's throw a dart at that board, pick any random middle manager, like anyone that doesn't basically own the place or is part of the family that owns the place. Ask them, they'll all disagree. So my take is that the breakdown has nothing to do with the top and everything to do with the middle.
Interesting.
Because in my experience, the people that own businesses in this area have like long understood this to be true, actually. So I feel like I can repeat, like I'm not in that business, but I know many that are. And so I can like repeat a common trope. And it would be, oh, well, of course we all know that fill in the blank disadvantaged population. So like literally ones I've heard this month are, well, of course we know that our Mexican workforce is the best. Of course we know that our women drivers are the best. Of course we know that our, Black crew members are the best. Like, in other words, it's like, it's obvious. Like it's not even like a conversation. And then the reason's always the same. And it's that it can differ a little bit by situation, but it rhymes with, because we found that one good employee leads to many others, because it turns out this is like what we just said is true. Mm-hmm. Turns out that, if we're talking to owners, that the options of the populations we're talking about aren't awesome. So when we treat them right, they really appreciate it because the alternatives suck. So it's like all self-evident to owners that this is true, but that is not true for the people that work for the businesses. Of course there are exceptions, but on average, the folks that are sort of middle management, on average, they came up through the ranks. They started on a crew. They ended up in management over some number of years, that they like everyone. So I'm not really faulting them. Maybe I'm faulting them, but I at least understand the instinct. When they see folks that aren't like them, in various ways, right? Don't go to the same church, don't look the same, aren't the same gender, yada, yada, yada. It sort of disrupts their sense of the world. Understandably, because their identity is like, hey, that's how we come up, and or that's how people come up in this business. And if all of a sudden, the majority of the frontline team members are coming through a different path, what does that say about my future or the people that I've brought in? Or it's a little disconcerting. It's like, what's the so what on?
Yeah.
I think the so what is that you can't delegate leadership, right? So the top of the organization has to lead the charge as it relates to solving this problem, because if they delegate it, people are going to hire people like themselves, but people like themselves don't want the jobs. So leadership has to do what they know. Do what they know. And what the business opportunity is, and this is sort of hits home for what our business is to give ownership the ability to effectively lead down to the point of action as it relates to executing what we're talking about. And then I'd say there's a second so what, which is you need to get people from those groups in middle management desperately. Desperately, like even if you have to splint it for a while. Right? Because like that's your bridge. And so if you've got a high potential person that maybe is 2 years out, you figure out how to get them there now and splint it, because the benefits are so significant.
I think what's interesting about this conversation is like it's that back to the marketplace. It is not as simple of a problem as like, hey, let me give you a bunch of job candidates that somewhat more or less qualify for this position that you're looking for. And so you can hire them very quickly, work on one project, and then they're done, and great. You fill the gap. This is like a complex system, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's a complex system that you have to really look at and get involved with piece by piece, from management of the business to finding and encouraging people who actually want and are excited about working in the profession, building community,
Give them education,
giving them yeah, absolutely. And there's so many components. I don't think that most people are looking like we're still trying to solve the problem with a simple, like, LinkedIn zip finder application. And like,
well, I mean, I say like once a day that, you got to be in love with the problem, not the solution, always, 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 always. And this one, I think, I don't want, when I hear conversation about this, even from people that are spending a lot of time thinking about this and being paid to think about it, I don't really believe most of the time that they understand the problem, that they become fixated on, their own projection of the problem or some solution they've jumped up. And like, in some ways, the fact that I don't have a horse in the race yet on this, I think it makes me more confident in my take. Cause like, I'm not advocating for any, like, I don't, this is just my take. Like, I'm not selling anything in this area. I don't have any sort of vested interest in being right. Well, right in this way, at least. And to me, like, that's actually, like, back to where we started. It's one of the reasons why it's nice to mull things for a while, is because, like, I don't need to be right yet on this. Like I can like change my opinion easily. I can, seek more information, not to validate what I think, but to open my mind.
Learn, yeah.
And, once you've got an asset that's big enough, it's sort of hard to do that.
Yeah. Well, super cool. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I was supposed to say, Kayla's going to get mad at me. I was supposed to say up front that we're going to do a Q&A in the last 10 minutes. So we're at that point, we're at that point in time. And so if you have any questions based on this conversation, please put them in the Q&A box in within the Zoom panel below. I just saw a comment from Miguel. What's up, Miguel? I agree with the premise of looking for labor in these communities. So that's a cool thing. I don't know, Miguel, if you have any further questions on that, feel free to put that in the chat box. Does anyone have any questions? Because I have more questions for Sean if you don't. We have a hot take.
I'll like literally talk to a brick wall if I'm asked to.
We have a hot take round coming up in a few seconds. So while we're waiting for questions, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I was thinking that we would do just a quick hot take round. I got some questions and just quick answers, quick brief answers, no significant thought, first word and thoughts that come to mind.
Okay, right. Shoot.
What is the one word you would use to describe XBE?
Capable.
For the average business, VC funding or no VC funding?
Oh, no VC funding.
What is the one word you would use to describe your leadership style as CEO?
Intense.
Yeah, sounds about right. Running or biking?
Oh God. I mean, you always want what you can't have. So I'm gonna say running because I only have so much in my heel that I can do now. But
planter.
Yeah.
How would you describe you have a podcasting history experience? How would you describe your podcasting history?
It was great. It was no, I mean, in that so when the 2-sentence answer, ever since I was, past puberty, I would hear that, this pre-podcasting, but like people would say, oh, have I heard you on the radio, or you sound like you're on the radio or whatever. And it's funny because I never heard, hey, have I seen you on TV or the movies, but but the voice, people like the voice. And so like, I always thought, man, I got a lot to say and I got a voice that people, think sounds like it's on the radio. So like, I think I need to try this sometime. So it was like a real bucket list item. And I I really enjoyed it. It was also, it turns out it's a way to meet people. And
Yeah.
I ran that show for years. It was pretty popular. So if I asked someone to come on, they likely would come on. And so I've met 60 people that I had wanted to spend an hour talking to, via, that show. And it was great.
That's cool. Okay, we have a comment / question from Ram. We keep hearing and understanding productivity at construction sites is a big need. Can technology solve the problem? Will frontline crew adopt technology-enabled tools or processes?
So, I and we are literally in this business, so this is not a hot take. Like I have a lot of thoughts on this and experience, which is that like most waste is due to bad planning, to cut right to the chase.
Mm-hmm.
And the planning isn't done by the front lines. So I think in the question is the mistake that people make, which is thinking that the productivity is mostly a function of like what's happening when you go look at the job site by the people that are there due to their own, work ethic, skills, etc. I mean, there's some of that that's true. If they have better tools, if they're managed better, if they have better incentives, could you get some additional yield? Sure. But the vast majority of the waste is because planning was lousy and you didn't sync up the supply of resources with the demand for resources, and you didn't level load the system to avoid peaks and lift valleys. That's where almost all the waste is. So therefore, almost all of the solutions to how do you improve efficiency at the job site have very little to do with the job site. They have a lot to do with knowing what your backlog is, understanding what the resource requirements are. That's like low level.
So it's like in the prep work.
100%. 100%. And that's not just a theory. I mean, that like our business is very successful basically because of that, because we solved that problem. And so like I every day talk about this and am still sort of amazed at how little it is understood fundamentally that almost all the waste is because of poor planning.
So for founders that don't come from the construction industry, how do you build credibility with construction customers?
So I love this question. It comes up all the time. And my sort of take is that construction, contractors, people in construction have a lot of people in their company that are in construction. So like, they don't really need more of that. They need what they don't have.
Yeah.
And so, I have to be fluent. Like, I mean, this is true for our entire company. All of our people have to be fluent, but like I lived this because I knew a lot about the various parts of our business, except for construction. Basically, that was the part I didn't know anything about. And so like, I had to get smart enough to leverage what I had that they didn't have in a way that was helpful to them. That doesn't mean that no one's going to mistake me for being a guy that came up through the ranks in construction, right? I've literally never worked on a crew in my entire life. But I have spent a lot of time understanding the problems that they have and, understanding their processes, like literally what they do. And for the purpose not of being one of them, because they already have a lot of themselves. They don't need more of that. What they need are the things that I have that they don't have, that XBE has that they don't have. And so I see this as like, you just have to create a bridge. And I don't think that's that hard. Like if you listen, that's like step one. Like actually ask them questions and care about the answer and like remember what they say and use it in the future. Like like Dale Carnegie 101 type stuff. Watch some YouTube videos, have a sense as to what the heck's going on. Like just even try.
Become fluent. Become fluent, and then get it, and then also, I think
good enough's good enough, though. In other words, like there's no purity test here, because what they want is, in fact, if it feels like a purity test, what you should hear is not that you need to understand construction better, but that you don't have anything worthwhile you're offering aside, which is like kind of tough medicine, but that's how I would hear it.
Yeah.
Because like you just have to, like, I don't have to speak construction as my native tongue. It's like construction as a second language, and I'm like perfectly fine as it relates to that. And that unlocks the ability to offer the other thing. And so like most of the reaction wouldn't be at all about the fluency if you're at all responsible about becoming fluent, which is not hard.
Yeah.
It's about, you know, what else do you have?
I think there's also an aspect, there's potentially a way to have an advantage. If you truly have something that, from a third party perspective, that is something that they don't understand and something that they need clarity on, and you just have a better purview on that. And if you can, I mean, it's legitimately, I love the language analogy, because if you understand the basics and can be conversational and can be just passable in conversation, people are interested in speaking with you, because you're going to have a unique perspective, right? You come from a foreign place, and that foreign place, if you can interact, is super interesting for people.
Yeah, you're right. It's difficult to go to France if you speak no French.
Yeah.
But if you're like doing a good enough job to get by, then yeah, if you have an interesting thing to offer, you know, a product, information, you know, perspective, experience, heck yeah, they're all for it, you know.
Well, cool. All right. Any final questions? I think the process of being in love with the problem and not the solution is how you develop a process of solving problems. You continue to ask the right questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree with that, right?
Well, I mean, you know, the questions are hard, the answers are easy. That's like, you know, speaking of trite things, that's trite, but totally true. I mean, the problem is that I think the reason why people are reluctant to take that sort of trite advice is that questions have uncertainty in them, and that is, you know, that's vulnerable, and you have to have confidence in your ability to get through the question to an answer, whereas answers are, you know, are definitive, even if they're wrong. And so, I mean, to where you started, and I think this is very much kind of like your vibe, this comment, which is that, like, you know, having the confidence to wade into the unknown, whether it's starting a business or looking at the problems face, you know, on, even if you don't know what the heck the answer is, that like, that's an asset to leverage that kind of everything else flows from.
Mentality.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think skills, and I mean, one, you should have a reason to be confident. Like,
it can't be baseless, right? Right.
No, you have to have knowledge and skills and experience, and or some combination thereof. But you know, if you have it, you know, use it.
Yeah, love it. Well, cool, Sean. We're out of time. That was fun. We need to do this more often.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, appreciate everyone joining us. We're going to continue to we'll continue to post recaps in our Slack channel. So Sean will have to get you on, and if people have questions about what we discussed today, would be a good chance for you to respond and engage.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. See y'all.
Bye-bye.